The same velvet ribbon I'd tied around his childhood gifts was still in my hand when he told me to leave. Still, I folded it calmly, even as Natalie pretended not to watch me walk out into the snow. As the cold sank into my bones, so did the truth. They'd already written me out, wrapped and discarded. While their house glowed behind me, that soft ribbon cut deeper than anything Ryan had said. That's when I decided, if they loved appearances so much, I'd give them one they'd never forget. Now he parks cars for strangers inside the mansion I bought, a week after he shut the door on me. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Vivian Carter stood on the doorstep of her son's house, her breath visible in the crisp December air. The snowflakes danced in the air, soft and cold, but the world around her felt sharp. She clutched the gift in her hand, a sleek, polished box, wrapped in silver ribbon, a gesture of what used to be family, of what she used to mean to them. It had been years since she had felt the warmth of Christmas in this house, but today, she thought, would be different. She rang the doorbell. The sound was muffled by the thick walls of the house, the kind of home that was less about warmth and more about impressing. Natalie, Ryan's wife, appeared at the door with a smile that was too perfect, too rehearsed. Her eyes flickered for a moment, just a split second, and Vivian could see it. The discomfort, the strained politeness, the "we have to do this" mask that never quite reached her eyes. "Oh, we didn't realize you'd still come," Natalie said, her tone light. But there was a sharpness to it that wasn't quite hidden. Vivian nodded, her face composed, though the sting of those words hit deeper than she cared to admit. "I wouldn't miss it. Merry Christmas." Behind Natalie, Delilah appeared, her small figure soft against the backdrop of the grand, empty foyer. Vivian's heart clenched as the child walked up to her, her little arms wrapped around her waist. Delilah was the one person who still understood the unspoken things, the gestures that were made when words failed. "I saved you a cookie," Delilah whispered, holding out a small star-shaped treat. Vivian bent down, her fingers brushing through Delilah's dark hair as she kissed her forehead. "Thank you, sweetheart," Vivian said, smiling with more warmth than she felt. But then, Ryan appeared, standing in the archway of the living room. His gaze met hers, cold, calculating. He didn't move to greet her, didn't step forward with a hug or a word of kindness. Instead, his eyes narrowed as if he was already tired of the entire performance. "Mom, it's really not a good time. Maybe you should head out," he said, his voice steady but edged with a certain finality. Vivian felt a tightening in her chest, but she stood tall, refusing to let the hurt show on her face. She wasn't going to beg for their attention. Not anymore. Not when the years had shown her what kind of son she had raised. "Of course," she replied softly, her voice betraying none of the emotion that roared within her. She turned, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she made her way toward the door. The cold hit her like a slap when she stepped outside. The snow had thickened, the world turning into a blur of white. Vivian walked slowly to her car, the gift still in her hand, the weight of it heavier with each step. She didn't dare look back at the house. Not now. Not after everything that had transpired between them. Her car door closed with a soft click as she sat down, her breath fogging up the windshield. She stared out at the empty road, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The silence pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. This was the family she had given everything to, her youth, her love, her ambition, and they had thrown her out like a discarded object, something no longer useful. As she started the engine, the sound of the car's hum was the only thing she could hear, the noise mingling with the soft sound of snow against metal. The roads were quiet, and the town around her felt hollow, as if everyone else was going on with their lives, their Christmases, while she was left behind. The drive back to her apartment was a blur of streetlights and the rhythmic turn of the tires on the slick pavement. She didn't know how long it had been by the time she reached her door, but when she stepped inside, she was met with the unexpected sound of knocking. Cleo stood in the doorway, a bottle of wine in one hand, her face lit with a knowing smile. No words were needed between them. Cleo understood. "Want to talk about it?" Cleo asked, her voice soft yet strong. She stepped into the apartment, setting the wine on the counter. Her gaze swept over Vivian, unspoken empathy and the weight of years of friendship behind it. Vivian shook her head, her lips curving into a half smile. "Not yet," she said, her voice breaking on the edge of a laugh that didn't quite come. Cleo opened the bottle, pouring 2 glasses of wine. The deep red liquid swirled in the glass, catching the light like a promise. As she handed one to Vivian, their fingers brushed for a moment, and in that fleeting touch, Vivian found something she hadn't realized she needed: solidarity. Vivian raised her glass, the weight of everything she had endured threatening to pull her under, but she refused. Not tonight. Not in front of Cleo. "To new beginnings," Vivian said, her voice steady. "To the things we build without applause." Cleo nodded, clinking her glass to Vivian's. "To the ones who don't get erased." Vivian took a deep drink, the warmth of the wine filling her chest, mingling with the cold that still gnawed at her from the outside world. She couldn't change what had happened, but she could rebuild, and the world had better watch out, because this time she wasn't going anywhere. And as Cleo laughed softly, settling into the chair across from her, Vivian allowed herself a small, fierce smile. She didn't need their approval anymore. She had everything she needed to make them regret this moment. Vivian sat at her kitchen table, the dim light casting shadows on the piles of old sketches and project portfolios scattered in front of her. The red wine had settled in her veins, softening the edges of the pain, but her mind was sharp, focused. It had to be. The more she looked at the architectural blueprints, the more her past began to come into focus. Each project a testament to her own success, each house she staged now worth millions. Its value far beyond the price tags that Ryan had once proudly flaunted. She flicked through the pages of a particular project, a sprawling estate on the outskirts of town, a home that had transformed under her careful eye. She remembered the night it sold, the bidding war between buyers who hadn't even been able to appreciate the subtle artistry she had woven into every room. They had seen only the luxury, but Vivian had created something more than that. She had built beauty from the ground up, turning spaces into living, breathing showcases of possibility. The homes she had staged weren't just properties. They were monuments to her vision, to her expertise. They were proof that she had more to offer than Ryan could ever understand, more than he had ever let her. Cleo's voice broke through her thoughts, sharp and clear. "Your husband didn't just leave you love. He left you leverage." Vivian looked up to meet Cleo's gaze. Her best friend stood across the room, arms folded, an amused look tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Leverage," Cleo repeated, as if tasting the word, savoring the power behind it. Vivian's lips twitched in a knowing smile. "You're right," she murmured, flicking through more pages until one particular drawing caught her eye. It was the Conifer Hill mansion, the one she had admired from afar, the one Ryan had once boasted about trying to get the listing. It had seemed out of reach then, but now, it felt like the perfect opportunity to remind Ryan just who had the real power. Cleo watched her, sensing the shift in the room. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" Vivian set the papers down, her fingers tracing the edge of the mansion's blueprint. "I'm thinking about everything he's taken from me, and everything he never knew he owed me." The cold calculation behind Vivian's eyes made Cleo pause. She walked over to the counter, pouring herself another glass of wine, but she didn't sit down. She simply watched her friend, knowing what was coming next. Vivian picked up her phone, tapping it a few times before hitting call. The line rang twice before it was answered. "Harold?" she said, her voice smooth, controlled. "It's Vivian. I need to speak with you." Harold Bloom, her late husband's former business partner, had always been a quiet figure in her life. He had never been flashy or outwardly ambitious, but he had been sharp in ways that her late husband had failed to see, shrewd, calculating, and with an eye for detail that would have made him a formidable opponent if he'd ever chosen to play the game. But he hadn't. He had always preferred to remain in the shadows, supporting her husband, quietly ensuring that the foundation they'd built together never faltered. Now, Harold was the key. "What can I do for you, Vivian?" he asked, his voice calm, even distant, but the familiarity of it tugged at her heart. It had been so long since she'd leaned on someone. Too long. "I need access to the trust," she said simply, not bothering to soften her words. There was no point in pretending anymore. She had been ignored, cast aside, and now it was time for her to reclaim what was hers. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Harold was weighing her request. She could feel it in the air between them. Finally, his voice came, low and measured. "Vivian, the trust was set up for you. You know that. But it wasn't just about money, was it? Your husband, he wasn't as straightforward as you think." "I'm not asking for his secrets," she replied, her voice steady, but there was an edge to it. "I'm asking for what's mine. I want what was always meant to go to me, not to Ryan." Harold's response was slow, almost hesitant. "It's yours. It always was. And it's been untouched." Vivian's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her expression neutral. The funds were hers, untouched, just waiting. Waiting for her to take them. "Good. I want everything transferred to my name. It's time to remind them who's in control." Later that afternoon, Vivian sat across from Selena Tran, a high-powered real estate attorney known for her ruthlessness. The woman was a force in the industry, a necessary player for anyone who wanted to make a real mark in the world of luxury homes. Selena didn't smile, didn't waste time with pleasantries. She simply looked at Vivian, her eyes calculating. "You want revenge, or you want real estate?" Selena asked, her voice like ice. Vivian met her gaze, unflinching. "Both." Selena's lips curled upward slightly, as if she had been waiting for that answer. "You've got the leverage, Vivian. You know how to play this game. Let's make sure your son learns that lesson." As the day turned to night, the snow still fell softly outside, the world bathed in a quiet white glow. Vivian's mind was racing, the pieces of her plan falling into place. This was just the beginning. She had been erased, thrown aside like nothing more than a liability, but she would rebuild herself from the ground up. She would take back everything she had ever created, and she would make sure that Ryan and his family knew exactly what they had lost. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Cleo. "This is going to be good, Vi. They're going to wish they never crossed you." Vivian smiled to herself, a small, satisfied curl of her lips. Cleo was right. They had no idea what they were about to face. Vivian stood at the edge of the sprawling estate, her heels sinking into the thick, damp grass of Conifer Hill. The mansion loomed before her like a monument to everything she had once been shut out from. 9 bedrooms, an oversized kitchen with imported marble countertops, a sweeping staircase that twisted toward the second floor like a grand gesture to wealth and status. Ryan had once posted about trying to get the listing, his online bravado betraying a hunger for success he had never really earned. The thought of it now made her smile darkly. She had always wanted this house, not for the luxury, not for the showy exterior, but for what it represented. It was a symbol of success, of taste, of the kind of life Ryan would never appreciate because he took it for granted. The property had always been just out of reach, but not anymore. Not now. Selena Tran stood beside her, cool and composed as ever, her sharp eyes scanning the house like a hawk circling prey. She was already a step ahead, calculating every move. The owners are nervous. The market's shifting. They're asking for a quick sale, Selena said, her voice businesslike, every word measured. But they'll need to accept the right offer. They want out. Fast. Vivian nodded, already knowing what Selena was thinking. The deal had to be sealed in a way that ensured no one could trace it back to her. No one could see this as anything other than a perfect, straightforward transaction. Let's make sure it's done right, she said. The deal moved swiftly. Selena worked her usual magic, her negotiations ruthless and direct. Within hours, the paperwork was drawn up. The seller signed without asking too many questions. There was no need for pretense anymore. The mansion was as good as Vivian's. She didn't want it in her name, though. Not yet. Too many eyes on her. Too many people waiting for her to fail. So she did what she had to do. With a quick tap on her phone, she transferred the property into a holding company, VC Bloom Holdings. It was a quiet name. No one would suspect. She'd learned how to play in the shadows, how to hide her true hand. The wire transfer was initiated immediately, the payment clearing in 24 hours. Full price. No hesitation. By the time Cleo arrived at the mansion, it was already hers. The door opened into the grand foyer, where sunlight poured in through arched windows. The space seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something new, something bold, to breathe life into it again. Cleo walked through with her usual grace, but her eyes were all business. "The staging?" Vivian asked. "Done," Cleo said, a gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. "I used everything you kept. The holiday decor, the little touches that made it your space before. They'll never see it coming." Cleo had transformed it completely, turning the mansion from a mere display of affluence to a space that told a story, Vivian's story. Old-fashioned elegance met modern design in a seamless blend. The aged silver ornaments on the tree, the delicate garlands of greenery draped over the banister, the soft glow of lights casting a warm hue across the marble floors. It was perfect. A quiet invitation to wealth and taste, but a far cry from the cold, calculated luxury Ryan would have put on display. Vivian took a slow breath, standing at the center of the living room, surveying the fruits of Cleo's work. "They won't expect it," she murmured to herself. As if on cue, her phone buzzed. A notification. Ryan had posted a teaser on social media. "Showing something big soon, stay tuned." Vivian allowed herself a smirk, her fingers brushing the edge of a velvet chair. Ryan had no idea that what he thought he was about to offer the world would be taken from him in a way he couldn't even imagine. The irony wasn't lost on her. He'd spent years flaunting his connections, his status, and now here she was, the one who truly held the keys. She tapped the screen to scroll through the comments on Ryan's post. Most were typical, curious, speculative. But one comment caught her eye, and her lips curled into a sharp smile. "Can't wait to see this listing, Ryan. I'm sure it's beautiful, but we all know you can't stage a home like she can." It was Delilah. The child still saw the world for what it truly was, and somewhere deep inside, Vivian felt a pang of something bittersweet. "She's mine," Vivian thought, her resolve hardening. "She'll see what we can build. Together." For now, though, it was enough to know she had the upper hand. The mansion was hers. She owned it. And Ryan had no idea what was coming next. He would show the world what he thought was his. But the real power would remain behind the scenes, hidden in the walls of a house that could never belong to him. Vivian took a deep breath, stepping further into the space. She could almost hear Ryan's footsteps. Imagine him walking through it like an unwelcome guest, pretending to be at home. But the truth was simple. He could never touch this place. Not anymore. The doorbell chimed, a soft, welcoming sound, as the first few guests trickled in through the grand entrance of the Conifer Hill mansion. Vivian stood in the foyer, a vision of poised elegance in a deep burgundy dress that clung just enough to suggest confidence, but still flowed with the kind of grace that only someone who had built a life of purpose could manage. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind over and over, each step bringing her closer to what she deserved. She greeted each guest with the practiced smile of a hostess who had seen it all, yet none of them seemed to notice the subtle defiance that twinkled in her eyes. Not that it mattered. They were here to see the house, to appreciate the space, the luxury, but the real power was hers. And soon, they would all know it. Then, the door opened again. Ryan stepped in, looking around with that trademark smirk plastered on his face. He was dressed in his usual crisp suit, all polished surfaces and calculated charm. But the moment he stepped over the threshold, his eyes scanned the room, and his confidence wavered. Something about the grandeur of the space, the warmth of the decorations. No, it wasn't just the house that threw him off. It was the knowledge that Vivian was the one pulling the strings now. That this was her space, not his. Ryan blinked, frozen for a beat, before forcing his usual grin back into place. "Vivian," he said, his voice smooth, but there was an edge of tension beneath the facade. "I see you've outdone yourself again." Vivian tilted her head, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips, but there was no joy in it, just quiet, steely satisfaction. "Ryan," she replied, stepping forward to greet him, her heels clicking purposefully on the marble floors. "It's good to see you. I'm glad you could make it." She stretched out a hand, offering it with a warmth that didn't quite reach her eyes. Ryan hesitated before shaking it, the grip firm but lacking the warmth he once showed when they had worked together. "You're hosting an open house, I see," Ryan said, though the question hung in the air like a demand for an explanation. Vivian's smile widened, her eyes sparkling with an energy that he wasn't prepared for. "Yes, this is my house. I thought it would be the perfect venue to host such a special event." She gestured around the room. "Would you like a tour?" Ryan's lips pressed into a thin line, his mind working, calculating. It was impossible not to notice the soft holiday glow that filled the air. The same decorations he knew had been in his house just a few short years ago. The very pieces he had once dismissed as unnecessary, unimportant, were now displayed here with the kind of subtle elegance he'd never understood. "Sure," Ryan replied, his voice tight. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his usual bravado. "Lead the way." Vivian gave a slight nod, her footsteps guiding them deeper into the mansion. She walked with purpose, the quiet whisper of her dress moving across the floors, filling the space with the kind of stillness that demanded attention. She led him through the living room, past the ornate fireplace, to the dining area where fine china and crystal glimmered under the chandelier's soft glow. There was something almost poetic about it all. Ryan had always been about the show, the surface, but Vivian had built substance beneath it all. She had breathed life into the space, made it a reflection of herself. She didn't need to impress anyone anymore. She was already more than enough. As they passed through the grand hall and up the staircase, Vivian allowed herself a glance at Ryan, his face now tight with frustration, the mask slipping. He was beginning to see it. He was beginning to understand that this house wasn't just a play for her to get back at him. No, it was something deeper, something more meaningful. This was hers, every inch of it. As they neared the second floor, the soft sound of the doorbell interrupted their walk. Vivian's gaze flickered toward the entrance, a silent acknowledgement of what was about to unfold. She paused, watching as the next guest entered. The door swung open to reveal an older man, dressed impeccably in an expensive black suit, his presence commanding the room before he even spoke. "Mr. Adler." Vivian greeted him warmly, extending her hand as though she had been expecting him. "It's a pleasure to meet you in person." Ryan's head snapped toward the man, recognition flashing across his face. The name didn't register at first, but when the older man stepped closer, his smile all too calculated, Ryan stiffened. It took a moment for him to place it, but when he did, his face fell. The billionaire real estate mogul, the one Ryan had only ever dreamed of working with. The one he had once hoped would be impressed by his connections, his exclusive listings. And yet, here he was, stepping past Ryan as if he were no more than another guest. Vivian led the billionaire to the grand ballroom. The air had shifted. Ryan could feel it. He was no longer in control of this moment. She turned to him as Mr. Adler disappeared into the room, a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. "The home isn't for sale, Ryan," Vivian said, her voice cool and almost amused. "But your composure is." Ryan's jaw clenched. He fought to regain his composure, but the sting of her words was like ice water thrown on his face. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. This wasn't the way he had envisioned this moment. He had thought he could walk in, offer a casual tour, maybe make a sale. But now he was nothing more than a pawn in her game. Vivian turned away, her heels clicking sharply against the marble as she walked toward the next room, her posture perfect, the woman in control. Ryan stood still, watching her, knowing deep down that everything he had worked for was slipping through his fingers. This house, this moment, was hers. Ryan stood in front of the mirror, the harsh fluorescent lights above him making his reflection appear more jagged than it really was. The valet uniform he wore was too tight around his chest, and the hat, sitting at a precarious angle, felt like an insult. He tugged at the collar, trying to make himself look presentable, but the fabric scratched his neck like a reminder of everything he had lost. He had been sitting in the same sterile office for 2 hours, the words of the real estate firm's assistant ringing in his ears. "We have an event coming up, high profile. You'll start as a valet. If you perform well, we'll see about getting you on the sales team." He should have said no. He could have walked out, walked away, found another way. But he hadn't. The shame was too great. The money too tempting. And somewhere deep inside, Ryan knew he had to swallow his pride and take what he could get. This was his chance, his one shot to crawl back from the depths his mother and Vivian had tossed him into. So here he was, standing at the back door of a private estate, watching the opulent cars roll in, their engines purring like the soft whisper of a world he once belonged to. A world he thought he could control. Now, it felt like he was just one more cog in the machine, waiting for someone to notice him. The guests began to arrive, disembarking from their polished cars and strolling toward the lavish entrance, their conversations light, full of polished words and empty promises. Ryan stood at the ready, his face impassive, his mind wandering back to the mansion. He hadn't seen Vivian since that day at Conifer Hill. She was winning, and he was losing. "Mr. Carter," a voice interrupted his thoughts. Ryan looked up, his jaw tightening. Cleo stood a few feet away, a glass of champagne in one hand, a teasing smile on her face. Her expression was unreadable, but the glint in her eyes told him she knew exactly what was going on. She looked polished, graceful, every inch the woman who had supported Vivian through it all. "You look different," Cleo said, her voice dripping with amusement. "Full circle, huh?" Ryan's lips parted, but the words didn't come. He knew she wasn't mocking him directly. This wasn't her style, but the implication hung there like a dark cloud. This was the job he never wanted. And yet, here he was. "I'm just doing what I need to do," Ryan muttered, his pride making his voice hoarse. Cleo raised her glass, giving him a small nod of acknowledgement. "Good luck, Ryan. I'm sure it'll be a memorable night." Her words weren't unkind, just cold, almost like a final goodbye. She didn't linger, moving on to greet a guest with practiced ease. Ryan's gaze followed her, but the sting of her words lingered, gnawing at him. He turned back to his post, adjusting his cap for what felt like the 100th time, his mind spinning in 100 different directions. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to be the one in control. But now he was standing on the sidelines, nothing more than a hired hand in the very world he had once thought would be his domain. As he took the next car keys, Delilah approached him from behind, a soft, hesitant smile on her face. She didn't belong here. She was too pure for this world, too unaffected by the glittering surfaces that everyone else wore like masks. But Ryan saw her coming, and for just a moment something inside him shifted. Delilah sidled up next to him and handed him a folded piece of paper. Her eyes were downcast, her fingers trembling slightly as she passed it to him, careful not to make eye contact. "Vivian wants to know how the party is going," Delilah whispered. "She says this party is better than ours." The words were simple, but the weight behind them was clear. Ryan took the note without a word, watching Delilah as she hurried back into the crowd, her little frame swallowed by the sea of glittering gowns and sharp suits. A pang of guilt twisted in his chest, but he couldn't stop the harsh laugh that bubbled up. Vivian had won. And now, she was rubbing it in his face. The note trembled slightly in his hand as he opened it, reading her simple words. "Enjoy your night, Ryan. The game has changed." It was like a slap, though there was no malice in it. Just the cold, cruel finality of a woman who had long since stopped caring for his approval. For a brief second, Ryan felt as though the weight of the world was pressing down on his chest. Vivian had rewritten the rules, and he hadn't even realized it until it was too late. The night wore on, and Ryan dutifully took keys, ushered guests in and out of their cars, each movement a reminder of the place he had now found himself, no longer in control, no longer the one who called the shots. Vivian, on the other hand, moved through the party with the ease of someone born for this world. She greeted each guest with genuine warmth, never once acknowledging Ryan's presence. Not once did she mention him, not even in passing. She was no longer a mother, no longer the woman who had once raised him. She was a force, a powerhouse in her own right, and her triumph was written in every step she took. Ryan's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out with one hand, trying to keep his composure while a guest handed him keys for the third time that evening. Natalie's post popped up on the screen. "Revenge isn't classy." Ryan couldn't help but read the caption again, his eyes narrowing. He knew exactly what she was saying. He knew what she was trying to tell him. She was distancing herself, telling him that his path had been too messy, too harsh. But what Natalie didn't understand was that this wasn't about class. This was about survival. And right now, Ryan was just trying to stay afloat. Vivian stood in front of the large ornate mirror in her new office, her reflection framed by the polished chrome and glass that now defined her world. The room was immaculate, everything in place, everything hers. And yet, there was a sense of something more to come, something just out of reach that was waiting to fall into place. She'd built it all, brick by brick, from the ground up. Conifer and Bloom Interiors was now official. Her fingers traced the edge of her desk, an elegant vintage piece she had picked out herself, its curves both modern and timeless. She had planned every detail, every piece of decor, from the rich velvet curtains to the minimalist shelving. There were no family photos here, no traces of Ryan or Natalie, no remnants of what they had tried to make her feel she was. This was her space. Hers, alone. Cleo stood beside her, adjusting a few papers on the desk with a satisfied smile. "Looks good, doesn't it?" she asked, her voice full of approval. Vivian's lips curved into a small, confident smile. It's perfect, she said, her eyes scanning the office once more, taking in the clean lines, the subtle opulence. Every piece was carefully selected, every detail chosen to reflect her identity. This wasn't about flashy wealth. It was about creating a space where her presence could be felt in every corner, her expertise, her taste. It was time for the world to see it. The launch photos would go live later that afternoon, the moment she'd been waiting for. As Cleo stepped out of the office to make the final touches on the staging for a client, Vivian sat down at her desk, her fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard. The bio on her website came together seamlessly, formerly overlooked, permanently unbothered. It was simple, it was bold, and it was a statement. Her phone buzzed. She didn't look up. Her hands moved over the paperwork as she prepared for the next step. She had built this business to be everything she had once been denied. Now it was hers, every inch of it. The phone buzzed again. Vivian sighed and picked it up, her eyes narrowing as she saw the name. Natalie. Are you going to let this go on forever? The message read. We're not the same, Vivian. You can't keep acting like this is who you are. It's not. Vivian read it once, then once more. She wanted to feel something. Anger, maybe, or frustration, but all she felt was indifference. It had taken her this long to realize it. Natalie's approval no longer mattered. Not when Vivian was already rewriting the script. She put the phone down, her fingers still tingling with the weight of what she'd just read. As the notification from her website pinged, confirming the photos had gone live, a sharp smile tugged at her lips. She had won. Within hours, real estate agents began flooding her inbox. Her phone rang nonstop with inquiries. Vivian's staging packages were sought after, her designs now a mark of distinction in a competitive industry. Ryan's old clients, the ones he'd lured with his carefully curated image, had begun flocking to her. They wanted her touch. They wanted her work. One message caught her eye, one she hadn't expected. A real estate agent, his message brief but to the point. We're switching our staging to Conifer and Bloom. You've changed the game, Vivian. Her heart surged with quiet triumph. Ryan had spent years thinking his influence and connections would carry him forward. He had dismissed her, overlooked her. Now, the world was looking at her, and everything was beginning to shift. Later that week, a familiar face appeared at her office, standing in front of the sleek glass doors with a forced, practiced smile. Vivian didn't need to ask to know who it was. She knew that look. The desperate attempt at casualness. Natalie stood there, arms crossed in front of her, her eyes cool and calculating. She wasn't here to compliment or congratulate. She was here for something else. Vivian, Natalie said, her tone clipped. I have an influencer collab, and I was hoping you could help me out. I think it could be a good fit for your brand. Vivian raised an eyebrow, her gaze steady. Under what name? Natalie blinked. What do you mean? Vivian stepped closer, crossing her arms, her posture calm but strong. I know you're trying to use my name without actually acknowledging who I am. I won't help you with your collab under some fake name. If you want my expertise, you'll respect me as I am. Natalie's face tightened, and she quickly masked the frustration that flashed across her face. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. Just let me know if you change your mind. Vivian didn't bother responding as Natalie walked out, her heels clicking sharply as she left the office, a woman scorned. Vivian turned to Cleo, who had been quietly observing from the corner of the room. She tried to book me under a fake name, Vivian said with a small shake of her head, the humor in her voice dry. Like I wouldn't notice. Cleo chuckled. She's always been more about appearances than substance. You don't need her. Vivian smiled, the sharp satisfaction of the moment hanging in the air. She had no intention of looking back, no intention of letting them rewrite her story. They had all underestimated her. But there was still more to do. The next morning, Cleo called, her voice urgent. "Vivian, I installed a doorbell cam at the mansion. You might want to see this." Vivian's heart skipped. What happened? "Ryan, he's trying to sneak in and take pictures of the property. I caught it all on the cam." Vivian's lips curled into a cold, satisfied smile. Ryan had underestimated her one last time. But this time, he wouldn't be able to take what was rightfully hers. Not ever again. The soft rustle of the magazine as it slid across the desk was like a small victory all on its own. Vivian paused, fingers lingering on the edge of the issue of Lux Living New England, her breath catching for just a moment before she turned the page. Her name, bold, across 2 pages. The eye behind the elegance. The title felt strange to her, unexpected, yet exactly what she had always known. Beneath it was a full-color spread of photos, the stunning minimalist interiors of the Conifer Hill mansion, each space curated with Vivian's precise touch. Her original sketches, the ones she had drawn in the dead of night when she was too exhausted to care but too driven to stop, were featured as well. Lines that captured the very essence of what it meant to create not just a house, but a home. Her home. Vivian's fingers ran over the images, each one a reminder of her journey. A reminder of the years spent building something from nothing. A reminder that she had always known exactly what she was capable of, even when Ryan or anyone else hadn't. The accompanying article spoke of her rise, from the shadows of her former life to the forefront of high-end interior design. It detailed the way she had transformed homes, how she had brought each one to life with a grace and style that had made her a household name, whether people liked it or not. But the most satisfying part of it all? The byline. Her company, Conifer and Bloom Interiors, was front and center. Not Ryan's name, not his glossy, fleeting empire. Hers. Vivian leaned back in her chair, the magazine resting open on her desk, her eyes unfocused as she reflected on the journey. She had been overlooked, dismissed, and erased. But now, she was undeniably present. She had built a legacy, and now, the world knew her name. The phone buzzed with a message and her fingers hesitated over the screen. It was from Cleo, her words succinct. "You're on the map, V. Everyone's talking about you." Vivian smiled to herself, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She wasn't just in the game, she was winning it. Her success had already become undeniable, but success, she knew, was often met with resistance. Later that day, as she left her studio to run a few errands, she noticed the same familiar sleek black SUV parked outside, right next to her building. The tension in her shoulders tightened instinctively, and she glanced at the license plate before stepping into her car. It wasn't just a coincidence. Ryan had arrived. She'd expected this, and yet it still felt like a sting. The next morning, her phone buzzed with another unexpected message, this one from a real estate agent. "The listing next to yours is now available. Ryan Carter applied for the spot." It's been rejected. Vivian allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Ryan was scrambling. He had thought he could outpace her, thought he could muscle his way into the upper echelons of success just by relying on his old tricks. But what he didn't understand was that true success wasn't about who you knew or how much you could flaunt. It was about the substance, the depth. And that's what Vivian had always had. The door creaked open and Delilah walked into Vivian's studio, holding a drawing she'd been working on. Vivian's heart softened as she watched her daughter approach, a quiet figure, so much more aware than she should be for her age. Delilah didn't waste time with pleasantries, walking directly up to her. "Mom, are you mad at Daddy?" she asked, her voice small, but piercing in its simplicity. Vivian's heart lurched. She hadn't expected this conversation so soon. She put down the magazine, meeting her daughter's gaze. "No, sweetie," Vivian replied, her voice soft and steady. "I'm not mad at him. I'm rebuilding." Delilah tilted her head, her young face wrinkled in thought as she processed the words. She didn't ask anything else, but Vivian could see the understanding in her eyes, the quiet recognition that her mother was a force to be reckoned with. As Delilah left the studio, Vivian allowed herself a moment of solitude. The recognition she'd just received, though satisfying, felt like a starting point, not the destination. The magazine's spread was only the beginning, a stepping stone towards something greater. She had no intention of letting her hard-earned success slip through her fingers, not when everything was finally falling into place. Her phone buzzed again, but this time she saw the name on the screen, Natalie. "I hope you're enjoying your moment, but don't think this will last forever." Vivian didn't respond right away. She simply placed the phone down and looked back at the magazine spread. The words, "the eye behind the elegance," were still fresh, still so real in her mind. She had earned every single word. The quiet click of the printer echoed in the otherwise silent office. Selena Tran, ever the image of calm and precision, stood with her back to Vivian, her fingers poised over the keyboard as she made the final adjustments to the estate plan. Her tailored black suit, a symbol of her unshakable confidence, swished quietly as she moved. The document that had taken weeks to prepare now lay in the printer tray, ready for signature. Vivian felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders, her fingers hovering over the edges of the paper. The plan had been set in motion. The final step was here. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was hers. It was about ensuring no one, least of all Ryan and Natalie, could ever touch what she had built again. Selena turned, handing the document to Vivian with a quiet nod. "The trust is set," she said, her voice cool. "Ryan and Natalie are effectively cut out. Delilah's future is protected, and your assets are safely shielded." Vivian ran her fingers over the crisp pages, reading the terms as if to commit every word to memory. The trust, carefully crafted by Selena's meticulous hands, was airtight. The estate had been restructured. All rights had been shifted to Vivian's name alone, with no mention of Ryan or Natalie in any of the legalities. Delilah's college fund was securely placed into an irrevocable trust, safe from any attempt to access it by anyone, not even Natalie. The mansion, too, had been secured in a private trust, sealed with layers of anonymity. No public record could link her to it anymore. The house that had once been Ryan's dream had now become a symbol of Vivian's power, her own private sanctuary, her fortress. Vivian looked up at Selena, her lips pressing into a tight smile. "Perfect. Let's make sure they can never touch it." The next day, Cleo arrived at the studio with a sense of urgency. Her footsteps echoed against the marble floors as she stepped inside, her usual composed demeanor replaced by something a little more intense. "Vivian," she began, holding up her phone, "there's something you need to see." Vivian looked up, taking in Cleo's expression, the edge in her tone. "What is it?" Cleo handed over the phone, her finger tapping the screen. It was a message from a former client of theirs, one who had bought a high-end property they'd staged years ago. The message was short, but it packed a punch. He said he built everything from scratch. So did you, after he erased you. Vivian read the words again. The recognition she had earned in the industry wasn't just from clients. It was from those who had once dismissed her, belittled her, and watched her fall. But now, they were acknowledging what she had built in silence, after they thought she had been erased. Her heart tightened, but there was no time for sentiment. She was too focused now. The past was behind her, and this was her moment. Ryan and Natalie had underestimated her. They thought they could take it all. But Vivian had been playing the long game, and now the pieces were all falling into place. Later that afternoon, a package arrived at her office. The envelope was thick, official-looking, and her name was printed across the top in bold serif letters. She hesitated only for a moment before tearing it open. Inside, the contents were clear. A legal notice addressed to Ryan Carter. It was from Selena's office, officially notifying him that he had been removed from the inheritance entirely. No mention of the business. No mention of the family fortune. Nothing. It was final, and it would be delivered to him in person. Vivian set the notice down on the desk, her hands steady, though her mind raced. This was the last step. The one she had been waiting for. The moment when the line between past and present was irrevocably drawn. Ryan had always thought he was the one with the power. But now? Now Vivian had everything. A few days passed, and the tension in the air around her studio was palpable. The success she had worked for was now undeniable, but it had come at a cost. She had lost more than her share of battles, but she had come out victorious. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Delilah's voice. The little girl came in, clutching a piece of paper she had been working on, her face serious as always. She walked up to her mother, her eyes full of questions, yet she didn't speak at first. Vivian smiled softly, bending down to meet her daughter's gaze. "What is it, sweetie?" Delilah handed her the drawing. It was a picture of a house, an elaborate, sprawling design with arches, tall windows, and a bright sun shining overhead. It wasn't just any house. It was their house. The one Vivian had always dreamt of. Delilah's voice broke through the silence. "Is this what you're building, Mom? Will this be our house?" Vivian took the drawing in her hands, her heart swelling with emotion. She could feel the weight of her past and her future closing in around her. This was the home she had been building all along, not just for herself, but for Delilah. This was the future she was determined to create. Her eyes softened and she smiled warmly. "Yes, sweetie, it's exactly what we're building." As Delilah skipped away, Vivian allowed herself a quiet breath, the first moment of true peace she had felt in weeks. But she knew the battle wasn't over. The next phase was already beginning. Vivian sat at the polished table, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of a delicate porcelain teacup. The steam rose in tendrils, curling into the air like the remnants of the past she had slowly been distancing herself from. She had made it. Made herself into something new, something stronger, something more than the woman who had once been reduced to a footnote in Ryan's world. Her gaze rested on the door to her studio, waiting for the inevitable. The knock, when it came, was sharp. Loud enough to carry through the empty hall, but muted by the soft hum of the kettle. Ryan stood there, his expression tense, fists clenched. Yet there was a certain calm in his eyes, as if he were trying to mask the desperation beneath. "Vivian," he said, his voice low but demanding. "We need to talk." Vivian didn't flinch. She simply gestured for him to come in, her voice steady and cool. "Please, take a seat." He hesitated, a flicker of anger flashing across his face, but he sat down. His movements were stiff, calculated, as if every step he took in her space was one more reminder of what he had lost. "Tea?" she offered, lifting the teapot without waiting for a response. Ryan didn't answer, his gaze moving restlessly across the room, landing finally on the stacks of paperwork neatly arranged on her desk. The contracts, the trusts, the legal shields she had built for herself and Delilah. Everything was in its place, everything protected. "You think this erases what I did for you?" Ryan finally asked, his voice cutting through the silence. His words were sharp, a challenge, as if the act of offering him tea was somehow a betrayal. Vivian didn't flinch. She poured the tea slowly, watching the liquid swirl in the cup before setting it before him with the grace of a queen giving an audience to her subject. "No," she replied, her voice a quiet whisper of steel. This is because of what you did. The words landed with finality, an echo of every misstep, every betrayal, every calculated move Ryan had made to push her to the edges of his world. He had wanted her small. He had wanted her silent. And now, she was neither. Now she was the one in control. Ryan's jaw clenched. You can't just erase everything I've done for you. You owe me. Vivian's lips parted, but she didn't speak. Instead, she took a sip from her own cup, watching him, letting the weight of the silence stretch out between them. His frustration bubbled over, his voice rising. I want to be reinstated, he said, his eyes wild with a kind of pleading desperation. You can't just cut me off. I built that business. No, she interrupted, her voice calm, unwavering. You didn't build it. I did. Ryan's eyes flashed with a mix of disbelief and anger. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back, his hands slamming against the table. You'll regret this, Vivian, he spat. I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are. Vivian didn't move. She didn't react to his outburst. She simply met his gaze, her expression the picture of calm. You think you can still control the narrative? She asked softly. Not anymore. She watched as his breath quickened, his face reddening with rage. She knew what he was thinking, the same thing he had always thought, that he could overpower her, that his charm, his influence, his connections could pull him out of any hole. But this time, he was wrong. This time, Vivian had everything, and he had nothing. As he turned and stormed out of the room, his back rigid, Vivian allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. But there was more to be done. There always would be. Later that day, as the evening sky deepened into twilight, Vivian's phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Selena, her legal ally who had been handling the aftermath of Ryan's attempts to hold onto his empire. The message was simple, direct. Natalie just emailed me. She's threatening a social media campaign against you. Defamation. I've already prepared a response. It's ready to go if needed. Vivian's lips quirked into a smile, a small, cold thing that didn't quite reach her eyes. Natalie's move wasn't a surprise. She had been circling, waiting for her chance to strike, but Vivian was ready. The world wasn't going to see her the way Ryan and Natalie wanted. The truth was simple. She had built everything from the ground up. They had tried to erase her, but now, they were irrelevant. She quickly typed back, "Send it." Selena's response was swift. "Done." As Vivian set her phone down, Cleo appeared at the door, her expression slightly strained. "Vivian," she said, walking in quickly, her voice lowering, "you need to see this." Vivian's eyes narrowed, the calm mask slipping for just a moment. "What is it?" Cleo handed over her phone, and as Vivian looked at the screen, her heart skipped. There, in grainy footage, was Ryan, at the gates of the Conifer Hill mansion. He was shouting, his words barely audible through the camera, but the anger in his stance was unmistakable. He was raving, trying to get in, shaking the gates, his frustration and desperation clear for anyone to see, and Cleo had captured it all. "He's still trying," Cleo said, her voice quiet but full of meaning. "It's only a matter of time before he tries again." Vivian's fingers curled into a fist around the phone, her grip tightening. This wasn't over. Ryan wouldn't give up so easily. But neither would she. The sketchbook sat on the desk before Vivian, its pages a mix of delicate lines and youthful imagination. She ran her fingers over the cover, the weight of it suddenly overwhelming, and hesitated before opening it. Delilah's little fingers had filled it with drawings, her innocent interpretation of what the future could look like, built entirely from the quiet moments she'd shared with Vivian. Vivian flipped through the first few pages, scribbles of flowers, trees, sunrises. But then, toward the back, there was something different. Neater lines, more refined. Rooms. Complete rooms. Drawn in the style Vivian had perfected over the years. Her signature: minimalistic, clean, sophisticated. Her heart skipped as she stared at the last page. Future House was written in Delilah's careful handwriting across the top. Beneath it, a sprawling home. No, their home, unfolded in vibrant pencil strokes. The walls, the windows, the open spaces. The design was flawless, capturing everything Vivian had dreamed of and more. But it wasn't just a drawing. It was Delilah's vision for the life they would build. Their future. Vivian's fingers trembled as she traced the lines of the house. Delilah had seen it. She had seen beyond the fractures, the silences, and the broken pieces of the past. She had seen the dream Vivian had fought to make real, long before anyone else had. And it broke Vivian. A quiet sob escaped her lips, the tears slipping down her face as she let herself feel the weight of it all. The years spent fighting, the battles fought in silence, the sacrifice. For so long she had been focused on the fight, on what she had to build, to survive. But this was what it had been for. The love, the trust, the hope of a future. Not just for herself, but for Delilah. Cleo's voice broke through her thoughts. "She sees you clearer than her parents ever did," Cleo said quietly, standing at the door, her presence like a gentle anchor. Vivian sniffed, wiping her tears, but the smile that crept across her face was one of quiet strength. "She always has," Vivian whispered, her eyes still on the sketches. "She always knew." Cleo stepped closer, her eyes softening as she took in the sketches. "You've done more than rebuild a business, Vivian. You've built a legacy, and she's part of it now." Vivian didn't respond right away. Instead, she carefully placed the sketchbook in an envelope, sealing it with a sense of finality. "I need to send this back to her," she said quietly. "It's hers now." Cleo's brow furrowed. "Are you sure? She might—" "I'm sure," Vivian interrupted, her voice steady. "She deserves to know where she comes from, and she deserves to see the future we're building. On her terms, not anyone else's." Vivian quickly addressed the envelope, a lump rising in her throat. She didn't need to explain it to Cleo. She knew this wasn't about making a statement. It was about giving Delilah something no one else could. The freedom to imagine the world without the weight of her parents' failures, to see the beauty that had always existed, even when it felt hidden. Days passed, and the weight of the decision seemed to settle around Vivian's shoulders like a soft blanket. The future was uncertain. No matter how far she had come, no matter how much she had built, there were still forces working against her. Ryan, Natalie. The world that still refused to acknowledge her as anything more than someone they could dismiss. But now, Delilah had the sketchbook. Vivian knew the truth was in those pages, in the way Delilah had captured her dream. And that was more than enough. The invitation came 2 weeks later, neatly folded, embossed with gold lettering. Private design showcase, Conifer Hill Mansion. Invitation only. The date was set for a Friday evening, an intimate event to unveil the next phase of her vision. It was a chance to show the world exactly what she had created. No distractions. No more shadows from her past. Vivian stood in front of the mansion the evening before the event, gazing at it as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the property. It was beautiful, sure, but it was more than that. It was theirs. A place where Delilah could grow, where she could see the world Vivian had promised her. The next day, Delilah arrived, accompanied by a school friend. The girl's youthful curiosity was evident, her eyes wide as she looked at the grandeur of the mansion. Delilah was different now. She wasn't just a little girl. She was a reflection of everything Vivian had fought for, and everything Vivian had promised her. I'm so glad you came, sweetheart, Vivian said, kneeling down to kiss Delilah's forehead as she hugged her tightly. Delilah smiled, showing her the piece of paper she had tucked in her bag. Look, Mom, my friend drew something too. It's a big house, just like yours. Vivian took the drawing from Delilah's friend, glancing down. The little girl's sketch, though far less polished, captured the same essence: a house built with love, not perfection. It was simple, but it was hers. Later that evening, as guests filled the mansion, the energy shifted. Natalie arrived, her presence still sleek, polished, but something was different. She had tried to take the spotlight for so long, but now, her attempts to diminish Vivian's success seemed so much smaller in the face of the monumental achievement standing before her. Vivian smiled thinly as she passed Natalie. No words were exchanged. But as Natalie's eyes flickered to the framed photos of the Conifer Hill mansion, photos of Vivian's work, Vivian saw the flicker of something in Natalie's eyes: frustration. That night, after the event, as Vivian stood in the quiet of the mansion, a new message popped up on her phone. She hesitated before opening it. It was a post from Natalie. When toxic parents try to manipulate children, they leave scars that last a lifetime. Worst, never forget. Vivian stared at the words, her heart pounding. She could feel the layers of tension that had built over the years. But now it didn't matter. Her daughter's future was safe. Vivian's legacy was in motion. And no matter what Natalie or Ryan said, the truth was already out there. Vivian sat at the dining table, a warm light spilling over the surface as Delilah set out her sketchbook, the edges of the pages curling slightly from the constant handling. It was their weekly ritual, one Vivian had insisted on, long before anyone could understand what it meant to her. This time, though, there was a quiet calm to the atmosphere. No rushing, no distractions, just the two of them, finding the beauty in the art that lived between their worlds. You ready to start, sweetie? Vivian asked softly, her voice calm but purposeful. Delilah, who had grown quieter in the past few months, nodded. Her pencil hovered above the paper, her fingers now more assured than they had been when they first began their lessons. Vivian had shown her how to sketch with scale, proportion, and precision, how to bring the world into perspective, literally and figuratively. It was more than art. It was more than just creating something beautiful. It was about teaching Delilah to find structure in the chaos, to create order, even when the world around them refused to. You remember what we practiced last time? Vivian asked, her eyes catching the glint of confidence in Delilah's gaze. Delilah nodded again, her eyes focused, her small fingers working the pencil as she started sketching the lines of the house from her dreams. She'd grown so much since that first lesson. Vivian marveled at how far she'd come, the way her daughter's artistic eye had sharpened, and how much more confident she was in her ability to bring something to life. The art was more than just an escape. It was Delilah's way of taking ownership of her future. Every line she drew, every room she imagined was part of their future, one Vivian had promised to protect. And it was becoming clearer by the day that Delilah had inherited that strength from her. As the lesson continued, Delilah's teacher at school had noticed the change too. When Vivian picked her up that week, the teacher had made a point of pulling her aside. Vivian, I just wanted to mention that Delilah has been thriving. Her work in class, her creative thinking, it's really impressive for someone her age. She's ahead of the curve. I think she has real potential. Vivian's heart swelled with pride, though her face remained calm. I'm glad to hear that. We've been working on some art at home. The teacher smiled, but there was something unspoken in her eyes, a recognition of what Delilah had been through and how she was rising above it. Vivian knew that Delilah's strength wasn't just in her art, but in her ability to see beyond the mess that had been her life up until now. She was starting to understand that not only could she control her destiny, but she could also create it. The peacefulness of their small home was interrupted when Vivian's phone buzzed with a text from Cleo. Her heart sank as she saw the name. It was from Ryan. "I want supervised visitation. It's time for Delilah to come back to me." Vivian's fingers tightened around her phone. Ryan had been quiet for months, but his demands were now resurfacing. It was no surprise. Vivian had known that Ryan wouldn't go quietly into the night. He would always believe that he could take Delilah, that he could break her, like he had tried with Vivian. But it wasn't going to happen. Not again. Vivian looked at Delilah, who was still sitting at the table. Her head bent over her drawing. She was blissfully unaware of the storm brewing outside their door. With a deep breath, Vivian composed herself and responded to Ryan's message. "Your request for supervised visitation has been denied. I will not let you use Delilah to settle your grudges." The response came swiftly. "You can't keep her from me forever." Vivian set the phone down with deliberate calm, pushing away the wave of anger that threatened to rise. She wasn't going to let Ryan use Delilah to manipulate her. Not anymore. She glanced at Cleo, who had arrived moments after the message and stood watching her with a knowing look. "The security system is being updated," Cleo said, her tone firm but soft. "Only Delilah and the staff will have access now. No more disruptions." Vivian nodded, the weight of Cleo's words settling on her. It wasn't just about keeping Ryan out. It was about protecting Delilah from a world that wanted to take her, tear her apart, and use her as a pawn. Vivian wasn't going to let that happen. She couldn't. Delilah deserved to be free, to grow, to create, and to thrive without the burden of her parents' failures hanging over her head. That evening, as the sun began to set, Vivian took Delilah's hand and led her to the window. Together, they looked out at the horizon, the colors of the sunset blending with the light spilling over their home, their future. "Do you like what we've built, sweetie?" Vivian asked, her voice low but full of emotion. Delilah looked up at her mother, her face soft and full of trust. "I love it. It's everything we dreamed of." Vivian kissed her daughter's forehead, whispering softly, "And we're going to keep building. Together." Later that night, as Vivian walked through the quiet house, she felt the tension begin to ease. The security, the legal steps they had taken, it was all in place. But something gnawed at her. This battle with Ryan, with Natalie, was far from over. The world hadn't stopped watching, and the people who had been part of her downfall weren't going to stop trying to tear her down. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. A message from an anonymous source. She opened it, her heart skipping a beat. "We know what you've done, and we're watching. You're not untouchable." Vivian's stomach turned. This wasn't just Ryan anymore. There were bigger forces at play, and Vivian knew she was about to face them head-on. Vivian stood alone in front of the large mirror, adjusting the vintage cream gown that flowed around her like liquid silk. It was soft, timeless, much like the woman she had become. The gown was a delicate statement, one that held the weight of years of perseverance and silence. She had never asked for the stage. She had never demanded the spotlight. But tonight, it was hers, and she would stand there with every ounce of quiet dignity she had earned. The gala was in full swing when she arrived, its ballroom lit with 1,000 tiny lights that glittered against the darkened ceiling like stars. Guests in black tie attire sipped champagne and mingled under the grand chandeliers, each one trying to impress the other, vying for attention with their glossy smiles and practiced airs. But Vivian didn't need any of it. She was here for herself. She walked into the center of the room with a calm that felt almost surreal. She had never felt so certain of who she was. As she entered, she could feel eyes following her, but she didn't look around. She didn't need to. A few minutes later, the host announced the winner, his voice echoing through the room. "And the award for Outstanding Achievement in Design goes to Vivian Carter. The crowd broke into applause. The air hummed with energy, but for a brief second, everything around her seemed to slow. Vivian's heart raced, her breath steady as she made her way to the stage. She moved with grace, each step a testament to every moment she had fought to get here. She took the microphone, her fingers brushing against the smooth surface. The applause continued, a mixture of admiration and curiosity. She had always worked behind the scenes, creating spaces that told stories. But now she was the story. The moment stretched. Vivian's eyes scanned the room, past the faces of critics, past the industry giants, past the ones who had once doubted her. She was no longer a background player. She was the one everyone had been waiting for. The microphone in her hand felt warm, a soft hum of expectation reverberating through the air. She raised it to her lips, her voice calm but sure, filled with the quiet power she had cultivated. The things we build without applause often last the longest. The room went silent for a moment, as if the weight of her words settled into the very fabric of the event. Then, the applause came again, louder this time, more sincere. It wasn't just a congratulations for the award, it was for what she had become, for the quiet strength, the resilience, the vision that had carried her to this place. As she made her way off the stage, the photographer's camera flashed in quick succession, capturing each of her steps. Later, her photo would be all over the local news, her name in bold across the headlines. But more than that, the mansion, her mansion, had become a tourist draw. People were flocking to Conifer Hill, not just to admire the property, but to see what it represented. The house that Vivian had built. A house that stood as a monument to everything she had reclaimed. Later that week, Ryan showed up at a listing showing, a thin veil of confidence still clinging to him. He hadn't learned. Not yet. He still thought he could slide by, that his name alone would open doors. But that day, the door was shut in his face, literally and figuratively. The client, a billionaire developer, recognized Ryan almost immediately. His eyes flicked to the man with disdain, as if seeing right through him. "You're not who you say you are you?" the client asked sharply, cutting him off before Ryan could offer his usual spiel. "This is your competition's house, not yours." Ryan tried to recover, but the damage had been done. "I can show you something else," he said, his voice tight, but the client was already walking away, ignoring him completely. Vivian had built her own success, brick by brick, with quiet determination. Ryan was still trying to force his way through doors that had long since closed to him. Across town, Natalie was in the midst of her own struggle. Her influencer deals were drying up. Sponsors who once clamored to work with her were distancing themselves. The brand confusion had become too obvious to ignore. No one wanted to be attached to the name that had been tainted by Vivian's triumphs. Natalie, ever the strategist, had tried to reposition herself. She filed for a solo rebrand, new logo, new look, new everything. But it flopped spectacularly. The world had already moved on, and so had the brands that once called her their shining star. Her own social media posts, once full of glamour and success, now reeked of desperation. She didn't even have the grace to mask it. When toxic parents try to manipulate children, they leave scars that last a lifetime. She posted it with a bitter hashtag, Shakhan never forget, as if trying to shift the narrative back in her favor. But it wasn't working. No one cared anymore. Vivian had left her behind, and the world could see it. Back at the mansion, the days blurred into nights as Vivian settled into the rhythm of her new life. The house had become more than just a home. It was a statement. A reminder that the things we create in the dark, when no one is watching, often outshine the things built on empty promises and fleeting recognition. But as Vivian stood at the edge of the property one evening, watching the sunset over Conifer Hill, She knew the battle wasn't over. The world had seen her success. But it wouldn't be long before they tried to tear her down again. Ryan would regroup. Natalie would find another angle and the games would continue. She didn't care. The stage they never gave her was now hers, and she was going to make it last. Vivian stood in front of the towering, unassuming structure that would soon be the next jewel in her expanding empire. The hotel project was massive, far bigger than any of her previous ventures, and it carried a weight that she hadn't anticipated. But as she stood there, surveying the early stages of construction, there was no fear. There was only the quiet certainty that this was hers to command. She had opened the door to this moment alone, and now, with every stone laid, with every beam of steel raised, she would turn this building into something as transformative as the mansion that had redefined her life. She wasn't alone in the building, though. As she walked through the construction site, Cleo trailed behind, a silent but steady presence. Cleo had always been there, since the beginning, and Vivian knew that her support was more than just friendship. Cleo understood the intricacies of design and business like no one else, and Vivian trusted her with every step of this massive project. "This one's going to be a game changer," Vivian said, her eyes scanning the grand open space that would soon be transformed into a stunning lobby. The echoes of construction workers and drills filled the air, but the vision was already clear in Vivian's mind. Cleo nodded, her gaze taking in the empty space. "You've got a way of seeing potential in places most people would overlook." Vivian smiled faintly, her fingers brushing against the steel beams. "I've always known how to see past the surface. It's not just about making something beautiful, it's about making something lasting." A few weeks later, Vivian sat at her desk in her studio, the buzz of activity surrounding her as the hotel project continued to unfold. Cleo had been by her side every step of the way, but now Vivian was ready to bring in new blood, someone who could carry the torch when she wasn't around. Delilah. She wasn't just her daughter. She was a future force in the world Vivian had built. At 16, she had already shown more talent than most designers twice her age. So, Vivian made the decision to formalize it. Delilah would be her future creative intern, starting this summer. She leaned back in her chair, looking at the city skyline through her window, thinking about how much Delilah had grown. She had gone from the little girl who had drawn houses in her sketchbook to someone whose vision was already starting to align with Vivian's. Her future was set, but Vivian knew that it was up to her to ensure Delilah could step into this world with both the support and freedom she needed. With a sigh, Vivian grabbed the pen and began writing the note to Delilah, one she would give her when the time was right. It wasn't a letter about design. It was a letter about legacy. Vivian's next steps were just as clear. She wasn't just building a business. She was ensuring that the doors she opened stayed open for others. She had spent years being overlooked, pushed aside by those who saw her as insignificant. But now, Vivian was determined to create a path for others to follow, particularly women who, like her, had to fight to be seen. She set up a mentorship fund for women re-entering the design field after facing adversity, whether from life circumstances or the systemic biases that had kept them from rising. This fund would help them build their portfolios, gain access to the right networks, and find their place in the competitive world of design. She didn't need the accolades anymore. She didn't need the validation from the magazines or the media. She had already won. But the world still had its eyes on her. Vivian reached for her phone and opened the email from Selena. It was the final piece of the puzzle. She read the words slowly, savoring the satisfaction that came with them. "The clause has been finalized. If Ryan ever contests the estate, he forfeits all rights permanently. No legal recourse, no inheritance. Everything is yours, Vivian." She set the phone down, her heart steady. Ryan had tried to take everything from her, But this was the final lock on the door. He had no claim to what she had built. It wasn't just business, it was her life. And she had protected it. Late that night, as Vivian sat alone in the dim glow of her desk lamp, she revisited her will. It had changed so much since the days when she'd lived under Ryan's thumb. There was no mention of him, no mention of Natalie. Everything she had worked for, everything she had built, was left to Delilah, with clear instructions on what she was to do when the time came. Vivian carefully folded the document, sealed it in an envelope, and placed it in her drawer. She didn't need to speak the words aloud. Delilah knew. Delilah had always known. Vivian knew her daughter would rise to take her place when the time came, not because she was her mother, but because Delilah had the vision to lead. She would do more than carry the legacy forward. She would shape it, define it, make it her own. The quiet satisfaction of the moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Vivian stood, smooth and steady, and opened it to find Cleo standing in the doorway, holding a glass of wine. Cleo's eyes twinkled, her usual knowing smile spreading across her face. "I think we've done enough for one day, don't you?" Cleo said softly, holding up the glass. Vivian smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "You're right," she said, taking the glass. "We've come a long way." Cleo handed it to her with a final deliberate look. "But the best is yet to come." Vivian raised her glass in quiet agreement, toasting not just to what she had accomplished, but to the future that was already unfolding in front of her. Everything she had built was stronger now. It was hers to keep. And nothing, not even the ghosts of her past, could take it away. The ballroom shimmered under the soft glow of chandeliers, their light spilling over the polished floors like liquid gold. It was the kind of night that felt almost too perfect to be real. The guests were all smiles, holding champagne flutes as they laughed and whispered in the corners of the room, but there was a quiet weight to the evening, a weight that Vivian had carried alone for far too long. The gala was a success already. The numbers had come in, and the evening had raised over $200,000 for housing insecure grandmothers, a cause Vivian had championed from the start. As the crowd settled into their seats, the buzz of excitement fading into a low hum, Vivian stepped up to the podium. Her gown shimmered, a deep blue velvet that caught the light with each movement. But it wasn't the gown that commanded attention, it was her presence. She took the microphone, her fingers lingering on the smooth surface, feeling the familiar weight of all the moments that had led her here. She was no longer the woman they had kicked out. She was the woman who had risen. The applause from the crowd had already started, soft at first, then building as she walked up to speak. Vivian let the noise wash over her for a moment before raising her hand to silence it. There was no need for pretense tonight. Not with this crowd. Not with these people. She wasn't here for their validation. She was here to give back, to show them the world she had built, the world that had emerged from all the pain. Her voice rang clear and steady, the words simple but laced with everything she had been through. "They kicked me out," Vivian began, her gaze sweeping across the room, her eyes locking briefly with Cleo's, who stood at the back with a proud smile. "But I kept building." The words settled, quiet but powerful, in the hearts of the crowd. They were all silent, watching her. But it wasn't sympathy they felt. It was respect. Respect for the woman who had weathered the storm and built something no one could take away. Her speech wasn't long, but it didn't need to be. Vivian had already said everything that mattered. She turned away from the podium, the applause rising to meet her. But the night wasn't over. It wasn't about the applause anymore. It was about what came next. Later in the evening, as the crowd mingled, Delilah stood off to the side, holding a piece of paper in her hands, her fingers nervously tracing the edges of the page. Vivian had seen that look before, the one Delilah got when she was about to say something important. She made her way over to her daughter, a soft smile on her lips. "What's this, sweetie?" Vivian asked, her voice low and warm, a mother's comfort. Delilah stepped forward, her face a mix of pride and something more, something deeper. "I wrote a poem," she said, handing the paper to Vivian. Her voice was quiet but steady as she spoke the words aloud. "A home you don't have to earn, where love is all that's needed. No walls to climb, no bridges burned, a place where all are greeted. For this is where we start again, with hearts as open as the sky, where dreams are built on steady ground and love will never die." Vivian blinked, her throat tightening as she took in the words. The poem wasn't just about a house. It was about everything they had built together. It was a vision of the future. Her future. Their future. She hugged Delilah tightly, not needing to say anything. The weight of the poem was more than words could convey. It was her daughter's way of telling Vivian that she understood. She knew exactly what had been done for them, and she would never forget it. Vivian didn't expect to see Jenna at the gala, but there she was, standing near the buffet table, her expression softened by something Vivian had never seen before: regret. She hadn't spoken to her sister in years, not since the day Jenna had turned her back on her. But now, as Jenna approached, Vivian felt a pang of something she hadn't expected. Maybe it was the years of silence, maybe it was the strange pull of family, but when Jenna stopped in front of her, there was no anger in her eyes, only a quiet apology. "I'm sorry I stayed quiet all these years," Jenna whispered, her voice small but sincere. Vivian blinked, her heart beating faster as she processed the words. She didn't respond right away, but the walls she'd built for so long began to crack, just a little. "You're here now," Vivian said softly, the words carrying more weight than she expected. "That's what matters." For a moment the two stood there, the years of silence lingering between them, unspoken but understood. Then, without another word, Jenna turned and walked away, her shoulders slumping as if the burden of all those years had been too heavy to carry. Later that evening, as the gala wound down, Vivian stood by the windows of the mansion, looking out over the grounds. The moonlight illuminated the perfectly manicured garden, the shadows of the trees stretching long across the grass. She could feel the weight of everything: the success, the battles fought, the people who had tried to bring her down, and yet, she felt lighter than she had in years. Ryan hadn't come. Vivian knew he would never enter this space again. He had driven by earlier, she was sure of it. She had seen the glint of his car's headlights from her office, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Not here. Not in this space. Not in the life she had built. The next day, Natalie's filing for a separation wasn't a shock. It had been coming for months. The news hit the media quickly, and the world watched as Natalie tried to rebuild herself, now stripped of everything she had clung to. The rebrand had failed, and now her separation was the final nail in the coffin of the life she had once tried to sell. But none of that mattered anymore. Vivian had built a future, her future, and nothing, not Ryan, not Natalie, and certainly not the ghosts of her past, could take it away from her. The doors she had opened alone had led her here, to this moment, this life, this home, and she would never let them close again. The summer sun streamed through the tall windows, casting soft light across the freshly painted walls of Delilah's new room. It was perfect, a little girl's dream, but not in the way that others might imagine. The bed was sleek, minimalist, with clean lines that complemented the room's simple elegance. The walls were a soft pastel shade, a calming backdrop to the vibrant artwork Delilah had already begun to hang. Shelves were neatly stocked with books and sketches, small treasures from Delilah's life. Vivian had designed it herself, just as she had designed every corner of this house, this home. The room wasn't just a bedroom. It was a space for Delilah to grow, to create, to dream. It was a sanctuary that belonged to her and her alone. And as Vivian watched her daughter move around, setting up her things with the ease and confidence of someone who had been allowed to build her world from the ground up, a sense of peace settled over Vivian that had eluded her for years. This house, this life, was Delilah's inheritance. Not just the materials or the wealth, but the freedom to shape her own path, to move through life without the shackles of the past holding her back. This was more than just a gift. It was a promise. Vivian smiled as Delilah ran across the room, her joy infectious. She had always known that her daughter would rise above the mistakes of their past, but to see it happening before her eyes, to see Delilah stepping into this new chapter with a heart full of hope, was something more than words could express. "Do you like it?" Vivian asked, her voice soft but full of meaning. Delilah's face lit up as she nodded, a shy smile creeping onto her lips. "It's perfect, Mom." Vivian stepped forward and kissed her daughter's forehead. "I'm glad you like it, sweetheart. It's yours. All of it." Later that day, Vivian sat at her desk, finalizing the details of a final trust document, one that would secure Delilah's future. She wasn't just handing over assets, she was making sure that everything she had worked for, everything she had built, would be used for Delilah's education and success, on her terms. The trust was clear. At 30, if Delilah met the educational goals set within it, everything would pass to her. No strings attached. No more interference from anyone, not Ryan, not Natalie, not anyone. Vivian's fingers hovered over the document for a moment. She had crossed every T, dotted every I. And now, all that was left was a single signature to make it official. Delilah's future was secured. But not everyone's future was so certain. Vivian had taken steps to ensure that Ryan would never gain access to the estate. Not just the house, but everything she had worked for. No access. Not even to the gates. It was a quiet finality, but a necessary one. She had fought too long and too hard for this life, this peace. Ryan's demands, his manipulations, they had no place here. Not anymore. She handed the signed trust document to Selena, her lawyer, for safekeeping. It was over. The doors to her past were closed, forever. And there was no coming back. Ryan would never again cross the threshold. The evening was drawing to a close, and as Vivian wandered through the garden, her garden now, she felt the weight of the years lifting. The flowers were in full bloom, their colors vibrant against the soft green of the grass. She knelt down to water a rose bush she had planted years ago. The act was simple, but it was a ritual, a way of grounding herself in the present moment, of reconnecting with everything that had come from hard work and love. It was peaceful here, in the garden, quiet, secure. She could almost feel her late husband beside her, as if he too could appreciate the beauty of this place. They had built this life together, even if the final stages of it had been solely hers. There were no regrets anymore. Only the realization that everything she had done was for this, for Delilah, for the legacy she would one day carry forward. Vivian looked up at the house, her heart swelling with pride. She had come so far. She had rebuilt everything, brick by brick, day by day. The mansion had become a monument to her strength, to her resilience, to everything that couldn't be taken from her. As Vivian returned to the house, her phone buzzed with a message. She opened it without hesitation. It was a simple notification from her lawyer, confirming that all legal matters were in place. Everything was sealed. Everything was safe. But just as she was about to put the phone down, another message came through. This one wasn't from Selena. It was from a familiar name. Ryan. It read, "You think you've won, but we're just getting started." Vivian's grip tightened on the phone. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. She had already won. Later that evening, Cleo came by with a bottle of wine, just like she always did when Vivian needed a break from the weight of it all. She entered the quiet study, a knowing look in her eyes. "Do you ever miss them?" Cleo asked softly, a touch of curiosity in her voice. Vivian looked up from her work, her smile slow but genuine. "No, I remember them," she said, her voice steady, full of calm finality. "But I don't miss them." Cleo raised her glass in acknowledgement. "Good, because the best is yet to come." Vivian clinked her glass against Cleo's, the sound crisp and clear in the quiet room. She wasn't just toasting to what she had already achieved. She was toasting to the future, to the life that was hers, to the doors that would never close again. The next morning, the hotel project received word that it had won several regional awards. It was another victory. Another piece of the legacy that would carry on long after the last stone had been laid. But Vivian knew the work wasn't over. It never would be. There would always be more to do, more to build. And as for Ryan, he would never step foot on this property again. Not even as a visitor. His place in her life had been sealed off long ago. As Vivian stood at the gates of her home watching the sunset, she felt no bitterness, no anger, just quiet satisfaction. She had worked for this. She had fought for it. And now, she was at peace. My son kicked me out on Christmas Day, so I bought the mansion. And a week later, he was parking cars in it.